So for today, as Susan mentioned, we're going to be talking about palm oil in the rainforest, specifically those in Southeast Asia. So for today, we've got a little bit of a background first. What is palm oil? Are you using it right now? Are you eating it right now? Our study area, that spot in Southeast Asia, specifically Indonesia and Malaysia. The methodology we use, which was developed heavily by Yasheng and Suchi, who are both here today. So if you got hard questions, make sure you're asking them, because remember, I'm just the first year. And then our findings, what we're planning to do further into the future. So this is what our palm oil trees look like. They look very much like a standard palm that you would see, with what looks like these clusters of berries. These are our palm oil nuts. So these clusters are going to be harvested by our farmers over here. So you can see we've got them moving these clusters onto these trucks. The palm oil nut only has a certain amount of time before it needs to be refined. So typically every refinery for a palm oil plantation is going to be within 100 miles of where that is being harvested. So once these are harvested, they're going to be taken to that refinery, and they're going to be ground down into an oil, and that oil can also be made into a paste. So nowadays, if you are having any form of vegetable oil, most likely that is coming from our palm oil plantations. Additionally, if you brushed your teeth this morning, put on a face cream, any of those sorts of toiletries, anything that with that pasty material, most likely is also coming from palm oil. These palm oil plants actually aren't native to Southeast Asia. They originally came from West Africa. They were brought over to Indonesia and Malaysia a while ago, but the trend didn't really pick up right away because these palm oil plants had to be hand pollinated. They didn't have a way to pollinate them until the introduction of a beetle species in the 1980s, which then led to this faster process since you no longer had to do it by hand. And we see a rapid increase in the number of palm oil plantations. Additionally, then in the 1990s, we have these major discoveries about how bad trans fats are for you. As we're seeing this increase in negative opinion about trans fats, we're looking for an alternative. This also leads to a rise in the palm oil production that's going on around the globe. And as these productions are increasing, that means we need more land. This is a really great image for what you were seeing when these are happening. These are tropical areas. So this picture is actually from Brazil, it's from the Amazon. We've got beautiful rainforest here, which is the same in Southeast Asia. And then we've got the addition of these palm oil plantations. And using remote sensing, we can actually see from space the difference in how this looks from this. It's going to look like those really straight lines. You're going to be able to identify it from way far out, which makes our research something that can occur. When you're looking at deforestation, it's a touchy subject. It's a touchy subject for companies. It's a touchy subject for local communities and larger government agencies as well. So by being able to look at this from that broad spatial lens, we're now going to be able to look at what's going on without having to worry about validating that sort of information. So for this area, I mentioned we're going to be in Indonesia and Malaysia. If you're not sure where those are, that's okay. I'm going to tell you. This is Australia, India, and China. So we're in Asia. We're right in the middle there. These are the three main areas we're going to focus on. So this is the Malaysian Peninsula. This is the island of Sumatra, and this is Kalimantan. Those are kind of our three main areas for this study. So what we did first is we actually partnered with a professor at the University of Diponegara in Semarang, which is located on the island of Java, down here. And he was able to supply us with 1,400 points that were known palm oil plantations or palm oil refineries. Again, we know that every refinery needs to be within 100 miles of a palm oil plantation, so that provides us with some more information there. You may notice that we also have this orange color up here. This orange color is what the World Wildlife Foundation has deemed as areas that are the most sensitive to deforestation. So these are on their watch list. And over 50% of the plantations in Indonesia, not including Malaysia, are located in those areas. This is a very important issue. We also have to worry about the biodiversity of Indonesia. This is a very unique area. You may be able to see my little tiger friend in there. That's a Sumatran tiger. Those tigers are only found on the island of Sumatra, which is one of those three areas. So if we're reducing the amount of forest that we have, That's going to be forcing our tigers into areas that are urbanized. That's going to be leading to biodiversity loss. So we've got our Sumatran tigers, we've got our orangutans, we've got our Komodo dragons. All of these animals are only found in these areas. So for this study, we took those 1,400 points that we talked about and we geolocated them. From there, we then went to look at deforestation trends from 2000 to 2020. That doesn't include the palm oil itself. We want to see where the deforestation was happening. And then we could map on these 1,400 points to see, using a buffer, how much of that deforestation was occurring around our known palm oil plantation locations, which then lets us look at the forest morphology and the IUCN biodiversity law. Let's go over forest morphology. When you think about a forest, there's a few different ways to think about it. Who here has been to the Middlesex Fells? Okay, we've got like 3 people, that's all right. You think about any forest then. But in an urban environment, we're not just going to have pure forest going for miles and miles and miles. What we have is a forest that's going to have some edges, it's going to have some loops, some bridges. And the most important things for this one that we need to know are the fact that around a forest, you've got those edges that are not going to be as good for maintaining the same quality of life for our animals. If you were a rabbit, would you rather raise your kids by a road or deep in a lush meadow? Kind of that sort of thing. And then we also have our bridges, which you can see in red over there. Those are connecting two forested areas. So using the Hansen data set, we mapped out these sorts of forest morphology for the entire time between 2000 and 2021. I have to show you 3 pictures from 2000, 2010, and 2021 to give you an idea. This is 2000. You can see we've got the green, that's our core forest. Red is going to be our edge effects. And then we've got our yellow bridges up there. 2010, so you can see we've lost a lot of that core forest already. When we get to 2021, we're really not seeing almost any at all on the island of Kalimantan anymore. And we lost even those edge effects around the island of Sumatra. So again, 2000, 2010, 2021. Doesn't paint a great picture. Now, in response to this, we've seen an increase in sustainable palm oil calls for sustainable palm oil. There's an organization called the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, which has gotten a large number of these plantations to agree that they will no longer deforest. However, that can be hard to implement. And when we're looking at palm oil, it's not just these large plantations. We have what we call smallholders, who are smaller farmers with just a smaller amount of land who are doing these sorts of things. It gets very hard to measure the actual deforestation. But we then looked at that buffer. So we're looking at a 1 kilometer and a 5 kilometer buffer around our 1,400 points. As you can see, deforestation continued. We're starting to see a drop off right around here, which hopefully means that we'll continue to see less deforestation, but over time, more and more areas have been deforested. The next thing we did was we used the IIASA first year of detection. So this is a really cool image where you can actually see when those palm oil plantations went into effect. The type of imaging that we use has been around since the mid-1970s. So you can go way back to see when these things started to be formed. And because those palm oil plantations have such a strict, visually obvious pattern, we can map that out. So in this mapping, our oldest plantations are going to be these dark browns, so like here and up there, and our newer plantations are going to be these greens. So even though we may not be seeing deforestation anymore, we're still seeing these brand new plantations forming. And this leads to the biodiversity loss. So we mapped out kind of within those buffers, how many of these organisms we're seeing based off of the IUCN's vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered list. So we can see that this is really going to affect the endangered mammals and the vulnerable birds and amphibians. Which brings us to our future research. So from all of this, we've actually put in an abstract to present at IIASA this summer, and we're currently working on a larger paper as well. This might actually end up being 2 papers. One that is going to look at what we found with this research through the lens of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are 17 goals that the United Nations set up as benchmarks for how to develop a nation sustainably. And so they include things like reducing biodiversity and reducing deforestation and protecting biodiversity. But they also include things like increasing the capital of developing countries and making sure that people who are in poverty have sustainable ways of earning money. So these sorts of things balance out in the project like this. So we're working on those two. We are still looking into the RSPOs and other sustainable palm oil. So Indonesia, for example, has its own sustainable palm oil organization, which isn't as well regulated, but these can be hard to look into because of all the walls put up around those. There's also the language barrier. So a lot of times something will be referred to as, let's say, Barat, which means center, but it'll be called Barat something. And then another spot, that same thing will be called the something and then Barat, which means that we can't map it, especially because they're in different languages, which makes it challenging. So we're still working on this one. This is proving quite challenging. And then finally, we've got that IIASA data set that I showed you already, but we want to do our own validation of that as well. I actually have some cool code pulled up if you wanted to see a specific area in Kalimantan or Sumatra or Malaysia and see when deforestation was happening, when palm oils were being built. I can zoom in on that for you. It's really fun. And so that's kind of where we're at. If you have questions specifically about the RFPOs and such, Dr. Gopal does have more information on that. That's kind of a quick summary of what we've been working on.
We are looking at 3 different materiality frameworks, as they are called. One is the UN SDGs that Mira spoke about. Every country has to sort of get money from the World Bank or Bank of China, even saying that they satisfy a particular sustainability goal. There we are kind of safe because growing palm oil provides livelihoods, and so it's a trade-off analysis, and more or less, how much jobs do you want to provide versus how much land do you want to lose? But the SASB, which is the SASB standard, is sort of points out that in the case of palm oil, which belongs to a thing called agricultural products, there are 17 sort of things that are relevant issues. And we've sort of looked at the environment, the greenhouse gas emission, which is the question that somebody in the audience had, energy management and wastewater. Water also is an important component of the total makeup of the environment. Obviously, we haven't spent a lot of time looking at social capital and people employed, women and children employed in the farm and so on, because that data is very hard to get. And I think Nandan knows all about it fairly well. And what we wanted to, and then the supply chain part, Mira already spoke about, these tend to be very, very complex. And so we can try to track it. There are ways and means of doing it, but that set aside, that's the materiality framework of SASB. More importantly, Mira, can you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
More importantly is the SFDR, which is the European Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation that went into operation in 2023. This is a punishment because it's not just a question of satisfying the framework. You will be given a penalty and you would be imposed a lot of fines. That's what they're doing. I just spoke to somebody in Denmark. So this was something that they are pointing out. So it's Article 4, 7, 8, and 9 are all sort of relevant to the palm oil cultivation. So we are now using our data to address these SFDR data points in order to talk about it, because the RSPO doesn't necessarily fit into the SFDR regulation. So there's a need to remap it to the new regulation in order to know who's at fault. And then we also pointed out in our database, these are the things that we have data on that are relevant to the SFDR indicators, what are called the sustainability indicators. And everybody now in Europe is talking about it because this is what one has to satisfy, companies have to satisfy. And these are the companies which will get hit under SFDR. The plantations we showed you, the 1400, we are showing you the ones which get hit on species richness, high levels of deforestation impacts. All of them mostly in Indonesia, some of them, of course, in Malaysia. It is a huge problem for palm oil at this point, satisfying SFTR. So there's a lot to unearth there. SFTR has provided you things in terms of the materiality risk exactly that you need to satisfy.
Suchi and Mira, the picture you showed of the edge of a palm forest and a rainforest is a straight line.
Yeah.
But it isn't always so.
No.
And a lot of our reliance, a lot of our expectation for biodiversity conservation, at least on the island of Borneo, is in the parks.
Mhm.
So one question is, can you use the morphological analysis to assess the efficacy of the park borders? Because the more fragmented they are, the more broken up they are, the less effective the park will be.
Absolutely. So, great question. This lets me show one of our very fun coding. So this is Google Earth Engine. This is a very popular open source way to code now. And this is looking at that Hansen global sustainability. So where is Wes, am I going the right direction?
Yeah, you're going to go to Impala?
Yeah, that's right. So when we're looking at this, let's look correctly. There we go. This is going to show us when deforestation has occurred. So fun. It's usually a little legend. I don't know where he went.
Somewhere around there.
It's somewhere. Yeah. Okay. So when we're looking at this, this is not only going to tell us looking at things like edge effects, which is what Yashang's research. If you want to talk more about that, it's all you. But this is also going to show us kind of that change over time. So if we're looking at a national park, are we seeing things getting closer to those borders? All of that sort of information can be found in images such as this, which is really cool to think about. So
how do we just update?
sorry?
So I presume, right, you're getting some type of scan
Yep.
down onto the earth on what kind of.
This one's from
Yes.
2020,
Yeah, but Mira, that's scary.
isn't it?
It's a monthly versus yearly.
Yeah, if you look at the
In
shells.
terms of.
No, should I?
Yeah, you should.
Oh, that's
So Cheryl works in Gopal. Also, another good area to look at is Nava, at Kinabalu. That area,
that's up this way, right?
that's up there, right?
Yeah. That's another fun spot.
And then there's also Florida. There are a bunch of parks that we could use to assess it.
Pretty much. All right.
So I
Robert.
don't have a question on lizards.
Oh.
Lizards.
Even though I can open but so one of my former students, Mike Mann, looked at deforestation and the profitability,
Mhm.
So when we look at that island, what constrains, the degree to which we could expand palm oil? Is it roads?
Roads.
So in theory, if you build more roads, you could go everywhere.
Which they have already
Yeah,
done.
they've done.
You can
So,
actually
so
do.
isn't it, so would it be not more effective then to like limit road building as
Yeah.
opposed to like?
Absolutely, because Robert, first of all, over the last 30 years, there's been a proliferation of what we call Borneo spaghetti, which is just roads that are driven into the forest just to be able to access stuff.
Right,
Then what happened is the Department of Forestry declared any tree within 30 meters of the road to be a safety hazard. That was done in order to eliminate those trees.
yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah,
But Robert, there's also paved and unpaved roads.
Yeah,
Unpaved
no.
roads go unobserved.
yeah, right.
Do they, you can't see on paper?
Well, we can see it, but for the policy and for the counting of the regulation, it's not counted. Meaning if you're reporting back to the government, you don't say I put an unpaved road.
Yeah, but okay.
We can see it on remote sensors.
Yeah, but that seems like the kind of effective pressure point, rather than trying to stop people from cutting it, you can prevent road building.
Yeah,
So the way they are attempting to do that is, this is the last point I sort of say, Mira.
Yeah.
Excuse me,
Oh, you're fine.
is looking at tribal and indigenous tribes. Indonesia has more than 300 populations. In these little islands, there's
Yeah.
different groups, all of them are protected under the UN. So that's the only way now that they're able to, restrict road building or anything, because they want to preserve their lives.
And Robert, just to emphasize your point here about this idea of roads, we can even see in this sort of imagery. So this is the year of first detection of palm oil, how many of them start closer to these coastal areas that are already having
Yeah.
roads and then moving inward. Yes.
So mapping that back to the companies again, so I know you have a list of different companies, are you able to then list, like, I don't know what that list, Suchi, that you showed a minute ago of the companies, is that your list or is that somebody else's?
No, it's our list.
Yeah.
Okay.
We collected by IMAP.
Okay, great, because that's just wondering, like, can you say who is, 'cause I know many of these companies, at least higher up the supply chain, have signed on to the Responsible Palm Oil Alliance and other initiatives saying that they're not going to, enable this deforestation and whatnot. So that's what I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit more as to how you went from these maps that show you here's a deforestation that's happening now, not 10 years ago, which I think is one of the things that's really cool about this, is you're showing, this is the old deforestation, and here's the new deforestation, and say like, who's still actively breaking the rules today?
So what we did, and this is Yashank's work, he sort of buffered 1 kilometer, 5 kilometer, 25 kilometers of every plantation. So the 5 kilometer distance seemed to be the one that was working, because if you look at 1 kilometer is too close. So the 5 kilometer distance showed us that at this particular point in 2020, 2021, which is the last years that we used the data set and looked at, there are quite a few companies that are close to newly deforested areas, right? And some of them, about 10 or 15% of them, I don't remember, we categorized them, belong to the RSPO, roundtable.
Yeah.
And some of them declared themselves to be members of the Indonesian RSPO, which is SLAGs, right? And there have been papers from the Indonesians arguing that both are the same. The Indonesian RSPO is supposed to protect the small farm, right? And there is no consensus. We haven't done field work, so we don't know. All we know is we are looking at satellite images and saying there's this overall risk of all these biodiversity, deforestation loss, tribal loss, water, carbon sequestration, all of these combined, these are the companies
These
that
are happening around these companies.
Yes,
locations.
yes.
Great.
Anita.
So kind of bouncing off of that, is it public knowledge like how traceable are certain plots of land to specific companies?
It's very challenging. A lot of these are private organizations. A lot of them don't have that information released. Kind of any of the networks that we've gone through. So we looked through the Bloomberg terminal and such. So it's very hard to find information on if, like, let's say we look at this little area, does this piece of plantation belong to that red dot or that red dot? So it's very challenging.
So
So
when
when
I
they
have an
come-
idea for your questions, I'll let Mira answer, and I'll answer.
Yeah.
That's the answer I have.
So then how are certain companies certified or like are able to attain?
So companies generally have to do paperwork and just say something, right? So many of them get away. There's a lot of greenwashing, what they sort of report.
Yeah, I think
And
that's
that's
really
what is
common
happening.
with those kind of things. So, sorry to take over, but I just stream of thought. So then I know like one of your subsequent analysis was going to be looking at a comparison between sustainable farming and conventional. On satellite imagery, can you identify the difference between the two farming practices?
Great question. So what we were planning to do is if the companies that we can confirm are in an RSPO or an ISPO, creating those same buffer zones and then comparing the statistics that we get from them. Like, for example, if we see that the sustainable ones, the majority of them had a peak deforestation in 1984 and it's fallen off drastically since then, versus ones that aren't in that who had a peak in, let's say, 2017. That's going to provide us with a lot of information about when deforestation is happening, if they're still doing it, or if it's all just something they're saying for greenwashing purposes.
So what is sustainable palm oil farming?
Sustainable palm oil farming, as is defined by the RSPO, is the main thing is that you are not further deforesting. It's the idea that you're kind of staying within the bounds you already have.
So something
There's
like-
other aspects of it, but that's like the big part.
So it's not necessarily in the app, like day-to-day practices.
Exactly.
just,
It's
like,
more related to the
minimizing
rates.
exposure.
And also more emphasis on humans and women employed and children.
Yeah, like that you're not basically running a slave trade. That's also not highly frowned upon. In the back.
Can you speak to so deforestation is illegal, right? So can you speak to the penalties for those that deforestation as well as who is in charge of the enforcement of the rules?
So the way the companies, big, I mean, these are the larger companies in Europe and North America. They are members and, they've signed on RSPO, so they promise not to buy the companies that are defaults. But like I said, they can do that with the main land holdings because they can, do all kinds of monitoring and make sure that it's meeting their standards, because obviously the brand is being impacted. So they do this regularly. But if you come to the smaller farmers, so one part of the company mandate is also to support small time agricultural farmers and small islands and so on. And that is where things are creeping in, because these small farms say, we are not members of RSPO, we are members of the Indonesian RSPO. So you have to buy from us. So there's not many studies done to compare what's happening. What are the regulations? What are the standards? Why do you need an Indonesian standard when there is the international standard, right? And the Indonesians don't want to answer this question. They've produced many scholarly studies that say it's the same. So that is some of the leakage that's coming in terms of not being able to, get certified on these international, levels that we put in place.
Who does the enforcement?
And the enforcement is supposed to be done by the Indonesian cooperative agricultural co-ops and so on. And I don't know if you've been to Indonesia.
Not that business.
So if you can sort of transfer your knowledge from other places, there's a lot of rampant, corruption. There's a lot going on. Things don't get reported. There's problems accessing the data. We found it extremely challenging to get plantations. We only got 1,400. They are more than 100,000. We could only get 1,400 by location.
Mostly the 1,400 that you got, if you skew towards the larger,
Yeah.
maybe you're getting bigger portion of the land that's like there.
So one idea that I've been playing with the last month is using AI and deep learning to identify plantations, which is even more finer because I'm going to get data from this company called Planet, which is at a resolution of 2 meters. So I could identify everything. So it would require a lot of processing. I tried to sort of digitize, I need to get a lot of training data. And I think it took me like over an hour to digitize 140 plots of land. You can imagine, I have to give like more than 1,000 if I want to get good enough data. So it's a tedious process, training an AI algorithm, but we can do it.
I have
Okay.
I have an idea for even more tedium. One of the most useful products for directing conservation efforts would be an overlay of forest heights, original forest heights over these data.
We had that.
You do?
We didn't show it because we thought you were not coming.
No, but okay, offline, what we should do, I don't know if I mentioned this, but we have data from like 428 plots all over Borneo.
Perfect.
Primarily Malaysia and Brunei, but it's all applicable to Kalimantan. So we can probably increase.
I'm talking to Yashant because I want Yashant to be listening to
Yes,
this.
we can do a really good job of that
Mhm.
if you're interested.
Exciting. In the back.
So if companies are, well, hopefully leaning for sustainable practices, how far, I don't know if you know this, but how far into the future have they planned for this? Because it's like deforestation isn't necessarily the only impact of this. Like for whatever reason, the first thing that comes to mind is like the impact on the 2023, but I'm not gonna go into that.
Yeah.
But like, how are these plantation owners planning on staying within the same, like, pre-existing cost of land while
not further impacting like the area. I don't know. I have a vendetta against fertilizer.
They use a lot of fertilizer.
I know.
China is very heavily involved.
I know, which is sad personally, so how do they, I don't know, for one of that, for example, are
There's
not, are they not?
They, when you ask
Not
the
more than-
Indonesians about this, they go, we need to we need to feed the population. It's the fourth largest population in the world. And, more than 60% of the people are below, their levels of standard of living. So you can imagine, is it the people or is it the soil? So they're willing to sacrifice the soil, in lieu of the people there.
What about the long term?
There's-
They're not
They're not
thinking
thinking
long
that
term.
far ahead of it.
There is a weird number being floated that by 20.
I have a question,
Go ahead.
a follow-up question to that is, I mean, so I'm trying to think about the data they show is both fascinating and really compelling. So we're from here. So one answer could be deforestation, pure hard stop, right? That's just a no-go. So that's the don't do it. Another thought is there a way to do it better? Is what they're doing in the process that they're doing, either sustainable? Are there better ways to approach it? Are there insights to that? And a third related to this point, this enforcement idea. I mean, in the end, it's we see in a lot of our financial and accounting research these huge mismatches between developed economies and developing economies, both in terms of the incentives and then just the mechanisms in place to ensure that things are done appropriately. And so one could see that a possible solution is that, well, if Indonesia doesn't have the internal resources to ensure compliance with whatever the laws are, whether it's building roads or you're not supposed to deforest, then maybe the solution is that you need an international mechanism to give them resources to help enforce that. So what do you guys see as kind of the next steps here? Because the answer of just stop doesn't feel viable in the developing economy with a huge population that needs to be fed, right? Because the economic incentives there to get those people that are just, it's hard to get around that, I think.
In terms of international organizations that are there, the Southeast Asian countries have their own organization, and many of them are part of, more or less, there's a big center here at the university, which is the GDP Global Development Policy, together. And that center, we are looking at China's role in all of Southeast Asia. So far, the only thing that we've done is prevented the back of China from sort of, investing in coal in Southeast Asia, because all of these things that they were doing, that particular practice is wrong. All of these other withdrawals will happen, but we need to get the scholarly research out and pinpoint things that you're raising. There has to be more awareness. There are a lot of NGOs, there's a lot of international organizations, but we need to work with a country because we can't go, impose our rules on. We need to work with the countries with partnerships. And so we are trying to do that because we work with NGOs as well as universities. It's a long road, but it's well worth it.
And then, do you see any pathways to better enforcement without type of setting? Are there pathways towards that?
Pathways would be to get it has to come from ground up. And somehow you have to educate the people like we've done for much of the conservation work with animals. So they don't kill the elephants, they don't kill the tigers, because that's bringing in the tourism dollars. The pathway is to work from ground up, because people have to be educated in order for this enforcement of rules to happen.
I have a question about, I was reading that RSPO certified palm oil has a price premium. And that large corporations aren't buying enough of it. So the producers that follow these certifications can't sell it and have to sell it back into the regular uncertified pool. So they're not actually getting the premium. I didn't know if I read that and I want to know more of that.
So we sort of only know about the big, super organizations, that are buying RSPO and they talk about it. Like all the chocolate companies, cosmetics, they all talk about using it. We haven't started out all these companies. We try to do that in the Bloomberg term, using the Bloomberg terminal, who's buying what from Indonesia to get the scope 3 emission? And it is next to impossible to do. So we are still trying. The very big companies, including ConAgra, I have a good idea where they buy from because they are open about it and they, talk about it. But not, everybody who makes a toothpaste, I wouldn't know where they're getting their palm oil.
Another thing I read, I thought the agriculture industry, again, in developed economies, is going through a big renaissance right now. This comes to the sustainability question that was raised before. That they're applying now a lot of new techniques based on abilities to do soil analysis in real time. And what it does, it allows agriculture companies, farms to be able to optimize the amount of fertilizer you do, the amount of water, etc. And a lot of the fertilizer problem in agriculture is driven by where you just dump as much of it on there, assuming that more is always better, which is not actually the case. And so is this another way that this could be potentially addressed?
Yes, you should answer with the mango example that we are working on. For the resilience and building natural barriers of protection.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, we have several projects on.
Yeah, it's a combination of the sensors, which are critical and not that expensive. And also how you relate to the services provided by natural forests. So like we're looking at mangrove and coastal forests, please. And you can make an economic argument that if they do what you were talking about and also had a natural forest buffer, they would save a huge amount of money.
Absolutely.
But
And not sacrifice yield and all that. other
yeah,
stuff.
but a lot of it is culture. Like in Belize, just as an example, there are Mennonite farmers. And you'd think that they would be very conscious of this stuff, but it's exactly the opposite. They're deliberately not doing those things because they think what they're doing now works. Yeah, we ship you to Indonesia.
Right. We have ongoing relationships with Indonesia, and we are trying to sort of influence, the university and the education there to do this community things that I was speaking of. Mira was actually a fellow that was supposed to go to Indonesia to this, and COVID happened. So we're hoping that she'll arrive there next year. To bring enthusiasm and zeal to educate them on power.
Fingers crossed. Yes.
Well, so this is more of an observation than a question, but I guess building off of, raising awareness and educating people and encouraging people to look for solutions like in the area being affected specifically. I feel like this would be a good opportunity to look into potentially or genetically manipulating the plants. Like, okay, I'm just gonna out myself as Southerner. I'm from the Carolinas. There are a lot of farms in especially South Carolina, and a lot of them, especially recently, have started like advertising that they're using more pest-resistant crops or ones that don't need as much water or whatever. So I feel like this would be a good opportunity to maybe look into that for these palm trees specifically, so they don't use as much resources, because what they're not using is given population of crops.
So one of the main reasons that we're not seeing that happening right now is that palm oil is very cheap. So there's not an economic incentive, as terrible as that is to say. But the way they're doing it right now is super affordable, and I don't think large corporations want to see that change. Yep. Yes.
How do you see consumer lifestyle taking a play in here? Like I did some research in 2020, I think cost of palm oil went up and then it goes back down. So how do you see consumer lifestyle affecting Indonesian palm oil?
It's really tricky because almost everything has palm oil in it at this point. Any type of vegetable oil that you're getting at the store is most likely palm oil. If you brush your teeth, it's most likely got palm oil. I'm sure Tom's has figured something else out, but it's everywhere at this point. So it's kind of fully inundated the system, kind of as a response to that trans fat craze in the 90s. And so at this point, it is so married. I have a hard time imagining separating it out.
So even if palm oil were to be taken out of Indonesia, it's being grown in India because they want that vegetable oil. It's been growing in Africa. They also in South
In
America.
South America.
So it is like moving all over because of the consumer demand.
Are you seeing China do most of that funding development as well? I see China do a larger share as well in the market, right, than the Asian palm oil.
Yes, I mean, China is playing a role everywhere because of the Belt Road Initiative. Every country is back. You know,
Could you
in
explain
Southeast
more
Asia.
about what's the Belt Road initiative?
The Belt Road Initiative is China's investments, you know, across the world that could sort of resemble their old empires. So, you know, they have a whole system of roads and oceans of routes that they have plotted. And the entire Southeast Asia, they've invested heavily. And they've also invested going up even into Russia. And that's why they, you know, tangoing with Russia right now in terms of politics, because they have made investment for the Belt Road railroad connection all the way to Europe, including Italy.
So yeah, then, I mean,
And Latin America is a big China presence.
so yeah, I guess you got consumer demand and then you have political influence from China, so with those levers alone, how do you really combat that?
Well, that's the reason we keep emphasizing that it has to come from people who live in these lands. Right now, the tribal people are all fighting for their rights. And the UN has decided that they have to protect these ancient tribes, especially in Indonesia, which has got like 300, you know, minority tribes. So they have a better right, I think, in terms of sticking to their land. And so there are various ways to fight it. And that seems to be one way. And the better way is to educate the population.
Yeah, I guess as well, we talk about educating the population. I don't know how long people have these people farming palm oil for a very long time, or
No.
is it
They
recent?
get started growing from 2000.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
So I guess it wouldn't be negative to suggest maybe other mechanisms, like spoke on, integrating more local biodiversity as well as.
I'm going to take both of you with me to Indonesia. You know, there's so much to be done and it is so hard to engage with them. But once you strike the connection, they're willing to sort of at least, you know, participate in the discussion.
There's a professor I know as well at BU that does a lot of games to understand agriculture and community needs. I can put you in contact with him as well. I'm sure you love that.
Actually kind of wanted to build off of that in terms of consumer response. So what if major consumers played a bigger role in steering away from palm oil as a material for cosmetics, toothpaste, that kind of stuff?
So you
Like,
yeah.
so my terrible example, cancel culture. What if, for whatever reason, like, there was some kind of public information put out there and saying, okay, these are the big cons to using palm oil, and this is why we should find an alternative. Like, I'm blanking on literally every example I've ever seen, but there are tons of them where it's like something.
Cardiovascular health, right? Like palm oils, canola oils. I think palm oil is the most detrimental, right?
We were using animal fat.
I think there was a really, I have like vivid memories of there was a really big campaign, but like specifically with orangutans as like the.
It was being funded by the soybean industry. I'm not even kidding. Those studies were funded by the soybean industry. Yeah. Yeah. It's a weird one.
I don't think they're as effective because it's just like this inert ingredient in everything. Like, you're not gonna convince.
You can't get rid of it, exactly.
And one of my other answers is, I remember as a consultant, some of the different companies developing oil from algae. And so as an alternative to palm oil, it's just way more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
yes, logically there are alternatives, but economically, they're not.
It's 2%.
Thank you all again for coming. Let's stay down here one more time. And I hope to see, April 6th will be our next presentation with Eddie from accounting and one of his students. So hope you I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Well, that was fun.
Thank you.
It's some shabby. I had a line to-
You need.